This videotape is meant to be a lasting and permanent history of your grandparents, Agnes and Joseph Katz, and their family. Your grandfather was, among his many talents, the family historian and prodigious record keeper. It is to him that we owe our thanks for nearly all the photographs and documents which follow.
Joseph Morris Katz, son of Sarah and Samuel Katz, was born on July 7, 1913 in Yampa, Russia, located near Odessa on the Black Sea. Sarah, Samuel, and their one-year-old son emigrated from Tsarist Russia to the United States in 1914 and settled in the Hill District of Pittsburgh. Agnes Roman Katz, daughter of Leah and Morris Roman, was born on November 27, 1915 in Pittsburgh.
This is a photograph from the early 1900s taken in Russia. Great-grandmother Katz is standing on the left in the back row. Your great-great-grandparents, Bessie and Max, are seated in the center. Incidentally, I am named after Max. This photograph is of your great-grandparents, Sarah and Samuel Katz, taken at their wedding in Yampol, Russia in 1912. In this early photograph taken in Russia, your great-grandfather Katz is seated on the left. He maintained his full head of hair his entire life. This may be the earliest known picture of your grandfather, Joseph Katz, taken around age 2 in Pittsburgh. These are two photos of grandfather Katz's second home in Pittsburgh, which he moved into at 4 years of age. Grandfather Katz later writes, "Our second Pittsburgh home, Vine Street, a block up from Center Avenue around 1917. I was 4 years old when I stepped into a bucket of scalding starch. I still have the scar on my right leg. The bucket was on the front porch. My brother Harris, 2 years old. My mother was 23 and my father 26. I remember that my father wanted to enlist as America entered World War I. Mom talked him out of it." These photos were taken by your grandfather in May 1990. This wonderful photograph of the children of Sarah and Samuel Katz dressed up for a party is priceless. From left to right in the back row, Harry Katz, Joseph Katz, John Emanuel Katz. From left to right in the front row, Jeanette Rosenberg and Hyman Katz. This old newspaper photograph from 1925 shows the members of the 8th grade at the James E. Rogers School in East Liberty. The second person from the right in the first row is your grandmother, Agnes Katz, around 10 years of age. This is the May 1928 edition of Boy's Ideal, a magazine which your grandfather Katz published when he was only 15 years old. According to him, it achieved national distribution. On the back page is an ad requesting cartoonists to submit drawings for criticism to J.K. at 1852 Monaca Place. J.K. is, of course, your grandfather, Joseph Katz. And Monaca Place is where the family lived in the late 1920s. Many years ago, Grandfather drove me in his Rolls Royce to visit the house in the Hill District, but it had been torn down. What a contrast between this forlorn area and his Rolls Royce. Grandfather Katz was quite a cartoonist in his day. Here are a group of original drawings, more than 60 years old, with captions which he saved these many years. Oddly, I can't ever recall having seen him draw anything. This photograph of Joseph Katz was taken when he was a senior at Fifth Avenue High School. Here is another photograph taken at Fifth Avenue High. The person on the left is unidentified. These two wonderful photographs of Grandfather Katz were taken while a student at the University of Pittsburgh. In these pictures, the dapper Mr. Katz with scarf, tie, and hat was 19 years old. This photograph of your great-grandparents Katz shows Sarah Katz at age 40 and Samuel Katz at age 43. This is the earliest photograph taken together of Joseph and Agnes Katz when your grandfather was 22 and your grandmother was 20. This treasured booklet, entitled The Pittsburgh Flood, printed in 1936, is what started your grandfather Katz off to fame and fortune. I recall his telling me that 1936 was the year of the Great Johnstown Flood, which caused the Pittsburgh rivers to overflow their banks and inundate downtown. During the flood, my father had wandered into town to see what was happening and noticed a number of people taking pictures. An idea flashed into his mind. He approached the photographers and asked them if they would sell their film. He then called a printer in Cleveland, arranged to have paper shipped to the printer, and in less than 36 hours offered for sale in Pittsburgh the first printed magazine about the flood. This was truly incredible because the newspaper printing facilities were all underwater, and of course television didn't exist. My father told me he sold 100,000 copies at 10 cents each. He was off and running. Here is a picture from grandmother's and grandfather's wedding in 1937. This small photograph was taken during grandmother and grandfather's honeymoon in Cleveland. Grandfather told me he couldn't afford a real honeymoon, and as he had business in Cleveland that day, he took grandmother along. Here is an early photograph of grandmother and grandfather in their first or second year of marriage. A momentous year. I was born on September 17, 1939. This is an early picture of me in my crib. I was born 3 weeks premature and weighed under 5 pounds. Here's a picture of grandfather's first office on Reedsdale Street on the north side. Grandmother was his first secretary. She is seated on the left. Grandfather's late brother Harry is seated in the center, and grandfather is on the right. This is an early picture of grandmother and grandfather in their first house on Stanton Avenue in East Liberty. This is a photo of grandfather wearing a fedora hat, which was very much in vogue in those days. This is a photo of me when I was 2 years old. I certainly was a cute kid. This is a photo of grandmother Katz and me. Do you think that's an old Pontiac or Buick in the background? Here's a nice family photograph taken in 1941 or 42. This is a wonderful photo of the entire Katz family taken during World War II in 1942. Standing left to right, Harry Katz, Agnes Katz, Hyman Katz in uniform, Jeanette Katz Rosenberg, and William Katz. Seated in the front row, left to right, Joseph Katz, Sarah Katz, Samuel Katz, Marshall Katz, and John Emanuel Katz. The first photograph is of Joseph Katz and his famous Wright kit. The second photograph shows the Wright kit being packaged, ready for national shipment. This wonderful stationery box really launched your grandfather's fortune. It was a brilliant idea at the time because with hundreds of thousands of Americans fighting overseas, there was a great need to write letters back and forth. This particular stationery box was ideal for both the serviceman and his loved ones back home, for not only did it contain lightweight stationery and envelope, but it included a folder for unanswered mail, a place for family photographs, and data on birthdays, holidays, and other important dates and information. Here's another of the great treasured photos from our family gallery. Seated left to right is cousin Paul Shapiro, cousin Judy Beck, and me. Looks like I must have an embarrassing itch. This is an early photo of grandmother Katz with cousin Judy on the left and me on the right. A nice photograph of grandmother Katz at age 28. This is a wonderful photograph of me at age 4 or 5. Another photograph of me taken during the same year. I was starting to get chunky by then. These are a wonderful group of photographs taken at grandfather's plant on Reedsdale Street on the north side. In this particular photograph, you see great-grandfather Katz on the left, check off information. John Emanuel Katz is on the right, and up above, William Katz. This photograph shows a mountain of stock ready for shipment. Thousands of cartons were lined up on S-Day, shipping day. On the first floor, where 2 rail cars were being loaded at a time. Benny and his crew worked 15 hours a day to deplete this mountain. This photograph shows the cutting and assembly room. This photo is of the assembly line on Reedsdale Street. On a good day, the crew could bat out 25,000 boxes of stationery. A section of the crowded warehouse. That's Jack Siegel, a longtime employee in the middle, and grandfather on the right. Here's another nice photograph with William Katz on the left, Samuel Katz, Joseph Katz, and John Emanuel Katz. This is a photograph of grandfather Katz in his office. As you can see from all these photographs, the original business was not gift wrap, but box stationery.
"1945 was a banner year in U.S. history. World War II ended. The French wine vintage was the greatest in the century, and I was born on April 2nd. Here's a wonderful photograph of Marshall taken in Atlantic City at age 6 in 1945. He was still a cute kid. Here's a wonderful old family photograph. In the back row, left to right, Agnes Katz, Joseph Katz, and Hyman Katz. Seated in the front row, left to right, Samuel Katz, Sarah Katz, great-grandmother Roman, Mrs. Morris Steiner, Mr. Morris Steiner, and great-grandfather Roman. This is a nice studio photo of grandmother Katz and Marshall. This was grandmother and grandfather's house in Squirrel Hill at 1225 Inverness Avenue, which was purchased in 1945. This is an actual photograph taken at that time. Marshall and I both grew up in this house, and you can see it today looking very much the same as it did nearly 50 years ago. At long last, a photo of me, age 1. A photograph of Marshall, age 7, at the Inverness Avenue home in front of the fireplace. An old photograph of great-grandmother Leah and great-grandfather Morris Roman. Incidentally, grandfather's middle name, in case you were wondering, was the same, Morris. Seated from left to right, great-grandfather Roman, great-grandmother Roman, Leonard Shapiro, Belle Shapiro, Ruth Roman, grandfather Katz, and grandmother Katz. Here's Marshall again at 8 years old. Papercraft's first printing press bought by Joseph Katz in 1947, a Heinrich Cottrell Aniline 4-color press. Isn't this a nice happy birthday card for grandfather Katz? Marshall pretended to be Babe Ruth in the backyard of our Inverness Avenue home. Marshall and me in the backyard of our Inverness Avenue home. Here I am again at 4 years of age in our backyard. Grandma and Grandpa's first trip to Europe, standing in front of the Colosseum in Rome. Marshall at age 10, wearing his Pittsburgh Pirates jacket. Chubby little rascal. Grandma in the backyard of our Inverness Avenue home. Photo of Grandfather Katz shot in the new Center Avenue plant. Smiling photo of Marshall at age 12 and a half. Family photo taken at the Old Westmoreland Country Club, which is now Green Oaks Country Club. Marshall and me in front of the Inverness Avenue home. Here I am in the front yard of our Inverness Avenue home, age 6. Don't I look studious at age 7? Nice family shot, possibly taken at the old Carousel nightclub. These are wonderful shots of Grandmother and Grandfather Katz at the Young Presidents Organization University in Phoenix, Arizona. In 1953, during a trip to Europe, Grandma and Grandpa met ex-King Farouk of Egypt. In a local newspaper article from October 1953, Farouk and Grandpa were featured regarding a possible business alliance between the two. The article received a lot of publicity, but nothing further ever happened. After 1949, Grandmother and Grandfather traveled to Europe nearly every year. Here is a classic shot from 1953 taken at St. Mark's Square in Venice with the famous pigeons. The Katz' favorite hangout in Paris, a Russian nightclub called Casanova. Grandpa writes, "We drank 11 bottles of champagne that long night, some of the magnums with the help of the orchestra." Another one of their Paris haunts, Club Romance in Place Pigalle. I remember this Western party well. It was held in the backyard of our home on Inverness. The garage was set up as a bar. The weather was perfect and everyone had a great time.
This studio photo was shot by Hans Jonas of Grandfather nearly 40 years ago when he was 42. A similar shot of Grandmother at age 40. Another studio shot of me at age 16. Grandmother and me. Notice my flat-top haircut. My first trip with Grandmother and Grandfather, summer of 1955, taken at a beer hall in Luzern, Switzerland. Particularly nice photo of great-grandmother and great-grandfather Katz. These are two photographs of Grandmother and Grandfather with Grandmother's sister, Belle Shapiro, and her late husband taken in Paris. A wonderful souvenir photo of Mother and Grandfather at a party in Hollywood Beach, Florida. Great photo of Cousin Paul, Judy, and me. This picture was taken at a YPO costume party at the Greenbrow Resort in White Sulphur Springs, Virginia. The couple on the near left is Sonia and Aaron Levinson. Here's a nice picture of our family taken at the Latin Quarter in New York. A treasured Katz family photo taken in 1957. Standing left to right, Hyman Katz, William Katz, John Emanuel Katz, Jeanette Katz Rosenberg, and Joseph Katz. Seated, Sarah Katz and Samuel Katz. Photo of Grandmother and Grandfather arriving at the airport in Madrid, Spain. The plane in the background was the famous four-propeller TWA Constellation, one of the earliest commercial planes to fly the Atlantic. Photo of Grandmother and Grandfather departing from the airport in Madrid. Wonderful shot of Grandmother and Grandfather at another favorite Parisian nightclub, Scheherazade. Incidentally, none of these nightclubs is still in existence. A nice photo of Agnes Katz. This wonderful studio shot of great-grandmother Roman was taken in 1958. Another great studio shot of Grandmother, about age 45. From left to right, Joseph Katz, Hyman Katz, Mayor Joe Barr, and Congressman Sammy Weiss at Papercraft Showroom in Pittsburgh. This newspaper article, dated October 28, 1960, announced the appointment of Joseph Katz as General Chairman of the 1961 United Jewish Federation campaign. Grandmother and Grandfather Katz at a Young President's Organization costume party at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. Grandmother and Grandfather at a gala party in Monte Carlo. As you see from this article, Grandfather was asked to head the United Jewish Federation's fundraising campaign for a second consecutive year. The campaign chairmanship was usually a 2-year job, and that trend continues to this day. I believe they raised about $2 million in that year. Today's campaign approaches $10 million. During 1960, Grandmother and Grandfather purchased a 3,500 square foot apartment in the Hotel Pierre. In this 1961 group of photos, you can see what the apartment looked like during its nearly year-long renovation. Even in those days, Grandfather complained bitterly about the cost. After graduating Cornell in 1961, I went to work for Papercraft in my first full-time job. In the spring of 1962, I enlisted in the United States Coast Guard. This photograph shows me in full uniform with 2 stripes for Seaman Apprentice. At the end of boot camp, we were permitted to go home for 2 weeks. Unlike anyone else in our company, I spent my 2 weeks with Grandmother, Grandfather, and Andy in the Riviera celebrating our parents' 25th wedding anniversary. Needless to say, when I returned to boot camp, I didn't tell anyone where I went. I remember this article well because it was probably the best article about Grandfather that had been written to date. It appeared on the front page of the business section of the New York Times. In August of 1962, the Katz family traveled again to Europe. Here is a great photograph of the family taken at Column d'Or, an outdoor restaurant in the Riviera mountain town of St. Paul de Vence. Earlier that year, Grandmother and Grandfather visited St. Moritz in Switzerland. Grandfather wasn't a skier, but you wouldn't know it from this picture. Another nice photograph of your great-grandparents, Sarah and Samuel Katz. What a great-looking couple, somewhere in Grand Bahama. Your grandfather received many awards during his life. This newspaper article describes one of them. On January 14, 1963, Papercraft Corporation was listed on the New York Stock Exchange, ticker symbol PCT. This photograph shows Grandfather on the floor of the stock exchange with the president of the exchange, G. Keith Funston. Grandfather bought the first 100 shares at 8 7/8 to open trading. This photograph, taken on January 25, 1964, shows Grandmother and Grandfather along with another couple in Acapulco. Grandfather caught an 8-foot 9-inch, 116-pound sailfish and a 175-pound shark, which is hanging next to Grandmother. This lovely picture of Grandmother was taken in Palm Beach during the following month of February.
Don't I look great? Ah, to be 20 again. Here are Grandma and Grandpa back in Palm Beach. Grandma and Grandpa couldn't resist returning to St. Moritz time and time again. This photo was taken at the Palace Hotel. And here are Grandmother and Grandfather with Mr. Robert Briscoe, Lord Mayor of Dublin. This newspaper article features Grandmother and Grandfather along with the other officials eyeing a model of the new Papercraft plant to be built on the banks of the Allegheny River in O'Hara Township. At the groundbreaking ceremony for the new plant, standing left to right, Joseph Katz, Hyman Katz, Pennsylvania Governor William Scranton, and Hiram Milton, Chief Executive of the Regional Industrial Development Corporation of Southwestern Pennsylvania. Grandmother and Grandfather at the December Pittsburgh Symphony Ball. They were a great-looking couple. August of 1967, Grandmother and Grandfather celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary at apartment 24C in the Gateway Towers apartments. In these photos, you can share their celebration. One of the most interesting and historical trips that grandmother and grandfather ever made was to Israel in June of 1967, only days after the Six-Day War. This photograph was taken on June 29th of grandmother and grandfather in Ismailia near the Suez Canal. Here's grandmother and grandfather somewhere in the Sinai Desert. This photograph of grandmother near a pair of shoes and helmet is especially memorable. The Six-Day War was such an overwhelming victory for Israel that the Arab soldiers fled, leaving their shoes and helmets behind. Here's grandfather back in St. Moritz. This is a nice photograph of grandfather and his father, Samuel Katz, taken at the home of Uncle Hi and Aunt Dinny. Grandfather frequently hired studio photographers to take family pictures. This photo of grandmother taken by Hans Jonas was probably one of the best. Grandfather always had a great sense of history and would try, if possible, to participate in it. As an example, here's a photo of grandmother and grandfather on the maiden voyage of the QE2. In what might be the very best photograph of grandmother and grandfather ever taken, here they are on June 4th, 1969 in Rome. Among grandfather's many awards, he was named Salesman of the Year in Pittsburgh. Another great shot of grandfather that summer in St. Tropez in the Riviera. Here's the Riviera couple again having dinner at Monte Carlo. During the same trip, this shot was taken at Eden Rock in Cap d'Antibes on the Riviera. Marshall met them for a day while vacationing in the same area. Earlier that year, grandmother and grandfather traveled to Vail, Colorado, and visited with Mr. and Mrs. Alvin Rogow. Here's grandfather with his first Rolls Royce, a 1970 green silver shadow. When he purchased a new one 10 years later, he sold this one to John Emanuel Katz. These two nice photos were taken in Honolulu, Hawaii. The Katz family has always been extremely charitable in a wide variety of causes. This article describes the Katz family gift of $500,000 to Montefiore Hospital. Subsequently, a portion of the hospital was named the Katz Pavilion, which remains to this day. Your grandfather was a well-known art collector in Pittsburgh. In fact, a portion of his collection was exhibited at the University of Pittsburgh Art Gallery in February and March 1971. Another great shot of grandmother and grandfather at the Hong Kong Hilton. Would you believe that this is Lauren Katz at 15 months old? Here are the happy couple at a party at Westmoreland Country Club.
Grandmother and grandfather returned many times to Israel, including this trip taken in March of 1972. These photos show the Dead Sea and Masada. Grandfather praying at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Grandmother and grandfather, together with Andy, Jeff, Wally, and me, traveled to Israel in September of 1972 to attend a dedication ceremony commemorating the restoration of the Yohanan ben Zakkai synagogues in Jerusalem. Grandfather had been extremely generous in helping to fund the restoration of these venerable synagogues, the oldest in the country. This photo was taken at the dedication ceremony on September 25, 1972. Grandfather is seated on the podium at the far right. Near him is the Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir, and next to her is the Mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek. Here's another shot taken during the singing of Hatikvah. After the ceremony, grandfather, Golda Meir, and Mrs. Evelyn de Rothschild from England chatted. Seated in the second row from right to left are Andy, Marshall, Wally, and believe it or not, Menachem Begin, who was then a member of the Knesset. As you know, he later became Prime Minister of Israel. This photo was taken inside the main sanctuary of the synagogues during the first ceremony after the dedication. Incidentally, these synagogues dated back to the 17th century. Grandmother and grandfather taken inside the synagogue in the main sanctuary after the ceremony. Prior to going to Israel for the dedication ceremony, grandmother and grandfather had rented a famous home high on the hills of the Isle of Capri called Il Castiglione. It was rented from Mr. Daniel Gerber, scion of the Gerber baby foods family. This grand palace had originally been rented for July, but great-grandmother Katz had become very ill, so grandmother and grandfather delayed their visit until September. In this photo, you see both of them in the town square of Capri. These photos are taken at Il Castiglione, overlooking the town of Capri, with the Tyrrhenian Sea in the far background. In January of 1973, grandmother and grandfather rented the yacht Carltina, where we traveled up and down the inland waterway from Fort Lauderdale to Palm Beach. Here are grandmother and grandfather on the bow. In one of the rarest photos known to mankind, here I am sporting a mustache. I wore this for about 6 months. Wally looks chic in her RBCC sweater. This is a great cheesecake pose of Andy. Boy, was she thin. Another photo of Andy on the pier somewhere along the inland waterway. Grandmother and grandfather had previously purchased a penthouse apartment at the Jockey Club located in North Miami. This photo shows them in the living room. In this photo at the Jockey Club apartment, grandmother is sitting before her makeup mirror with grandfather in the rear. Another one of those great photos of all time of grandmother and grandfather. This one was taken at apartment 24C in the Gateway Towers. Here's a nice shot of grandmother with Nicole and Lauren. One of grandfather's favorite pastimes was scouting. He'd become an Eagle Scout at age 12, which up to that time had been one of the youngest in Pittsburgh scouting history. He remained active with the Boy Scouts in western Pennsylvania for many years, and in 1973, as can be seen from this article, he received the Silver Beaver Award, the highest recognition that any local Boy Scout council can bestow. This picture, taken in August 1973 at the Silver Beaver Award ceremony. For the second consecutive year, grandmother and grandfather rented another beautiful yacht. Here they are in their boating attire. This is a great shot of Nicky taken in Pittsburgh. The opening of the Yohanan Ben Zakkai synagogues in 1972 was such an important event in Israel that in 1974, the country issued a set of 3 stamps in commemoration. At the National Conference of Christians and Jews annual dinner in 1975, grandfather received its coveted Brotherhood Award along with the late Arthur Rooney and Judge Homer Brown. Here's a nice photo of the Katz men taken in Florida. Seated in the back row left to right are Marshall and John Emanuel Katz. In the front row left to right are grandfather, Hyman Katz, and William Katz. Another nice shot of grandmother and grandfather taken at the apartment in the Hotel Pierre. During their frequent visits to the Pierre, they often sipped a glass of champagne. Here's grandfather quaffing a glass of Dom Perignon. From his pose in the second photo, it looks like he was feeling no pain. Nearly 15 years after the renovation of the apartment, it looks as great as ever. Here's grandmother standing in the living room. The statue at the far end is by French sculptress Germaine Richier. Here's grandmother and grandfather seated in the library at the Hotel Pierre. The painting in the background is by Bernard Buffet. Here's grandmother seated in the bedroom at the Hotel Pierre. The room was subsequently redecorated, with the bedspread and canopy material changed to powder blue. John, age 1, and Nicky, age 3, cuddling together. John, as usual, taking the phone from Nicky. At long last, construction of the Katz Pavilion at Montefiore Hospital had begun. I thought this was a particularly nice photo of grandfather taken in March 1976 when he was 62. On another historic occasion, Grandma and Grandfather took the maiden flight of the Concorde to Paris on May 25, 1976. Here's the traveling couple almost 2 weeks later, back in St. Marcos Square, feeding the pigeons. In 1977, Grandmother and Grandfather made their first trip to Egypt. Here they are on a camel near the Sphinx and in front of the Great Pyramid of Cheops in Giza. The greatest honor the United Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh can bestow is the presentation of the Emanuel Spector Award. Grandfather was its recipient in 1977. This business publicity photo shoot by the renowned men's photographer, Fabe Macrath, of Grandfather was never actually used.
For many years, the City of Hope National Medical Center held an annual dinner in Pittsburgh to raise money for medical research fellowships. In 1978, Grandfather was honored at the annual dinner, which was held at the Pittsburgh Hilton on May 3rd. A research fellowship was subsequently named in his honor. In this photograph at the City of Hope dinner, standing left to right are Senator Frank Church, Democrat from Idaho, Grandfather, and Governor Milton Chapp of Pennsylvania. A newspaper photo of the same shot indicated in its caption that 250 people attended the dinner. Here's a nice shot of Grandma, Grandfather, and Marshall at the 1978 Pittsburgh Symphony Ball. In May of 1979, Grandmother and Grandfather made their first trip to China. These photographs were taken at the Great Wall in Peking, now called Beijing. Here's a nice picture of Nicole and me. Another nice photo at the Gateway Towers of Lauren wearing Grandfather's Chinese cap and jacket. Another one of the great shots of all time taken at the Pierre apartment. Grandmother sitting in the living room alongside a small Mayol statue. This photograph was taken in March 1980 in Pittsburgh with the late Israeli general and war hero Moshe Dayan and his wife Rachel. Later that year, Grandmother and Grandfather visited General Dayan in New York. This photograph was taken at a luncheon at Tavern on the Green restaurant in New York City. Chairman of the board, Joseph Katz, sitting in the boardroom at Papercraft. Grandfather sitting in his office at Papercraft. Grandfather standing outside of the Papercraft office building. Joseph Katz and Marshall standing in front of the Papercraft office building. In case you thought the sculpture in the rear to be an Alexander Coulter, it was designed by Marshall. It still stands to this day. A great picture of Grandfather at the Pierre apartment taken by his next-door neighbor, Bern Schwartz. Nice group photos standing left to right, Jane Levine, Wally, Grandmother, Jerry, and me. Grandfather receiving the Horatio Alger Award, Hershey, Pennsylvania, on May 5, 1981. Joseph Katz standing in front of bronze doors at Papercraft with folder of Horatio Alger postage stamps. Nice photo of Grandmother and Grandfather in Vienna. One of Grandfather's outstanding achievements for both the Jewish community and the University of Pittsburgh was his agreement to chair the Israel Heritage Room Committee. The University of Pittsburgh is world famous for its many nationality rooms, but back in 1981, no new nationality room had been built during the prior 20 years. Grandfather successfully raised $350,000 and oversaw the planning and building of the room, which was completed a couple of years later. Incidentally, this project had been underway for nearly 10 years before Grandfather took over the committee and got the job done. Among Papercraft's ongoing publicity coups, an excellent article appeared about the company in July 6, 1981 issue of Forbes magazine. In another magazine coup for Papercraft, not only did an upbeat article appear in the November 1st, 1982 issue of Business Week, but the company's name was also mentioned on the cover. During 1982, grandmother and grandfather made another of their many trips to the Mideast, visiting Israel and Egypt. The first photograph is a close-up of the metal plaque in the Yohanan ben Zakkai Synagogue commemorating grandmother and grandfather's generosity in restoring the main sanctuary. The other photos show grandmother and grandfather in front of the pyramids in Giza in the Cairo Museum in a bowl symbol. On June 17, 1982, Joseph Katz received the National Tree of Life Award from the Jewish National Fund. The dinner at the Plaza Hotel was extremely well attended, and the guest speaker was CBS Evening News anchorman Dan Rather. Among the family guests attending the dinner, standing left to right, Eleanor Katz, William Katz, Jeanette Rosenberg, Denny Katz, Hyman Katz, and Wally. Seated left to right are grandmother, grandfather, and Marshall. This photograph, taken on December 1st, 1983, with grandmother and grandfather, features Secretary of State George Shultz wearing a red vest standing in the center. Shultz served under President Ronald Reagan. In August of 1983, grandmother and grandfather took a Baltic cruise on the SS Vista Fjord. Here they are seen boarding. On the same cruise, they are seen disembarking in Leningrad, now called St. Petersburg, with their friends Betsy and Ethan Schrow from Dallas. On August 14, 1983, grandmother and grandfather celebrated their 46th wedding anniversary aboard the Vista Fjord. The very next day, the boat docked in Gdansk, Poland, and here they are seen in that town. You may recall that Gdansk was the hometown of Lech Walesa, who is currently the president of Poland. I've always loved this photo of grandmother and grandfather in their later years. 1983 was a big travel year for grandmother and grandfather. Here they are again visiting Israel. These first two pictures were taken in the Yohanan ben Zakkai Synagogue. The third is a close-up of the memorial to their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Katz. This volleyball court is located in a large, attractive park in Jerusalem that is filled with kids during the weekend. Again, during 1983, grandmother and grandfather made another trip to Europe, this time taking the Orient Express from Paris to Venice. In these two photos, they were seen boarding the train in Paris. In this group of photos taken in Venice, you can see grandmother and grandfather once again in St. Marco's Square, but without pigeons. This is a particularly nice photograph of grandmother. In this 1983 photo taken in the Papercraft boardroom, here are grandfather and Marshall in front of the bronze doors. Incidentally, these doors came from the house on Inverness Avenue, and to go back even further in history. Grandmother and grandfather purchased the doors in 1945 from the Harry K. Thaw Mansion on Beechwood Boulevard. Here's another nice photograph of Marshall and grandfather in front of a Cerruti press in the Papercraft printing department. On May 13, 1983, grandfather was chairman of the Horatio Alger dinner, which was held in Pittsburgh. Here is a nice photograph of grandmother and grandfather taken at that dinner.
On May 17, 1984, the Board of Trustees of the University of Pittsburgh elected Joseph Katz a trustee emeritus. Joseph Katz writes, "This photograph was taken on May 15 on the occasion of my election as emeritus trustee after serving for 10 years as a trustee at Pitt, and in recent years as a charter trustee." Grandmother and grandfather at a Chief Executives Forum meeting in Munich, Germany. Grandmother and grandfather at another Chief Executives Forum meeting in Quebec City. Seated in the center is John Rawlins, founder of Rawlins Communications. These other pictures were also taken during their visit. In 1985, The Jewish Chronicle wrote this article on the Katz gift to the Jewish National Fund in Jerusalem in commemoration of the opening of the Joseph and Agnes Katz Recreation Park in Jerusalem, representing the largest single gift in the history of the local Jewish National Fund. One of the grandest family occasions in 1985 was grandmother's 70th birthday, held in a private suite at the Duquesne Club. It looks like everyone enjoyed their cigars that evening. I recall opening a bottle of 1924 Chateau Latour for the celebration, but the wine had long ceased to be drinkable. Fortunately, we had plenty of other great bottles to open. Here we are at the New York apartment, holding sabers on high. They are part of a set of chairs which are now in our house. Here's an absolutely great photo of grandmother and grandfather taken in the library of our home on Ellsworth Avenue. This is a nice photo of Wally and grandfather taken in the backyard of our home on Ellsworth Avenue. We came across this lovely family photo taken at the Pierre apartment of Aunt Ida, grandmother, grandfather, and Wally. A nice photo of grandfather and John at Gateway Towers apartment 24C. Another nice photo of grandfather and Nicky at the same place. Here's a great photo of grandmother and grandfather that was shot sometime in 1986. What a wonderful shot of Nicky and grandfather. On November 27, 1986, it was coincidentally grandmother's birthday as well as Thanksgiving. We had Thanksgiving dinner that year in grandmother and grandfather's apartment in the Gateway Towers. Seated from left to right is Andy, me, Belle Shapiro, Paul Shapiro, Lauren, and Jonathan. Here's another nice photo shot the same evening of grandmother, grandfather, Andy, and Belle Shapiro. Photo of grandmother opening her presents that evening. At a wonderful party at our home, here is grandfather and Lauren, face decorating by peanut butter. On May 5th, 1987, we traveled to Washington where grandfather received the American Eagle Award from the Invest in America organization. In this photo, grandfather is seen receiving the award from Nancy Reagan, wife of then-President Ronald Reagan. After the ceremony, Andy, grandmother, and I posed beside the American Eagle Award. In this photo, grandfather is seen accepting his award. To the right of the podium is Benjamin Franklin, who delighted the luncheon audience with his recollection of bygone days. I have forgotten the name of the man who portrayed Franklin, but he wears no makeup, looks exactly like the great statesman, and appears before many groups around the country. In what was grandfather's greatest act of generosity, he donated $10 million to the University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Business. In his honor, the school is named the Joseph M. Katz Graduate School of Business.
This is also the celebration of a man, a friend, a great man. Joe Katz first went into business at the age of 10. At 14, he set up a print shop in the family garage. In the 1930s, he went into the wholesale paper business, and by 1985, papercraft sales had grown to $170 million. Joe Katz operated the company by his wits, changing tactics to tailor them to a changing need or a changing market. He knew the value of keeping current, the personal involvement of the man at the top with what is happening in the market. And Joe Katz is more than a successful businessman. He's a philanthropist, one who never forgets a kindness. His family early had to accept care from the Montefiore Hospital, and the Katz Pavilion at that institution is dedicated in the memory of that kindness and a memorial to his parents. He is a trustee of this university, giving generously of his time and intelligence. He is on the boards of the Pittsburgh Symphony Society, the Montefiore Hospital, the Horatio Alger Association, and he is an Eagle Scout. That's important. The Katz Foundation supports many charities itself and civic activities, and his gift of this school is the largest single gift in the 200-year history of this institution. The picture that emerges from all this is of an instinctive businessman, a humanitarian, a man concerned with others, a patron of the arts, above all, an outstanding example of the entrepreneur. I introduce with pleasure, Joe Katz.
Wes, you were more than generous, but I thank you very, very much for your kind remarks. First, I especially want to thank so many of my friends who collectively have traveled scores of thousands of miles from their homes from one end of the country to the other to be here today. And also, I want to thank my many local friends and acquaintances and business associates for being here in this fabulous outpouring as far as I'm concerned. But surely, missed on this great day is my wife, Agnes, who for over half a century was always at my side, even when I was a student at Pitt. I can share with you that when a month ago when you received the invitation to this event, and we too received one at home, she quietly said, "I don't think I'm going to make it." It was one of the very few moments this courageous, intrepid lady really gave in. And she had a long, enduring fight and lasted longer than the physician said she would. Now back to the living. Ours is a small family, and most of that small family happens to be here, and I'm going to mention their names, and I would appreciate if they would rise for a moment. I would like to take this moment to introduce Marshall Katz, my son and his lovely wife, Wallace, my daughter, Andrea McCutcheon, recently married to Jerry McCutcheon, and my three grandchildren, Lauren Katz, Nicole Katz, Nicole Plessett, rather, and Jonathan Plessett. Are they around here on this floor? Or wherever they are?
One of Grandfather's other stellar accomplishments was the completion of the Israel Heritage Room at the University of Pittsburgh. It was dedicated on Sunday, November 1st, 1987. The year 1987 was not without its sadness. After 2 long years of fighting a courageous war with cancer, Agnes Katz died on September 5th, 1987. Towards the end of June 1988, Grandfather decided to take his immediate family to Europe on a grand holiday to celebrate his 75th birthday. In this photo, Grandfather can be seen standing on the veranda of his suite of the QE2 docked in New York. We all had dinner every night in the Queen's Grill at the same table. At the table directly behind us, Dean Martin dined with his family. Every night we had a special bottle of wine, which I brought on board from my wine cellar, including a rare bottle of 1969 Romane Conti. The highlight of our 3-week holiday was the celebration of Grandfather's 75th birthday in a private room at the Plaza Athénée Hotel in Paris. This photo was taken moments before the party began. Here's a nice photograph of Grandfather at the beginning of the dinner. In this photograph, Wally, Lauren, and Andy salute Grandfather. Grandfather sat at the head of the table, of course, while a violinist played. In this photo, a waiter can be seen displaying the birthday cake as we all sang Happy Birthday. Here's a better shot of the birthday cake. Well, it must be near the end of the evening because I lit up a fine Cuban cigar. JMK on the terrace of the Carlton Hotel in Cannes, France. Lauren and Nicole in Cannes. Thumbs up on this photo of grandfather at the Column d'Or restaurant in St. Paul de Vence on the Riviera. Another good photo of grandfather taken during our trip. This photo was taken of grandfather wearing his gold glasses. During February of 1989, Bill and Eleanor Katz visited Israel. Here's Bill standing under the JNF Recreation Park sign in Jerusalem. In the same shot, Bill is standing with our cousin, Shimon Katz, who lives in Jerusalem. Here we see Bill standing next to the commemorative plaque at the Yohanan Ben Zakkai synagogues. Here's another shot of the plaque commemorating Sarah and Samuel Katz. Although the plaque was dedicated for a volleyball court, in actuality, it is really a basketball court. Another shot of the basketball court with Bill and Shimon Katz in Liberty Bell Park in Jerusalem. Back in Pittsburgh, grandfather in this great shot with Dr. Freddie Fu. On November 24, 1989, grandfather and Thelma invited the family to a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner in the new apartment 22K in the Gateway Towers. Pictured here are Jerry and me wearing our Thanksgiving gifts. On May 4, 1991, Joseph M. Katz, patriarch of our family, died of cancer. While we end this family video on a sad note, we must think about all we have seen and dwell on the fairy tale life of our dear parents. They truly lived the American dream. I recall asking grandfather in the hospital one day, if you had it to do all over again, would you do anything different? He replied, your mother and I lived life to the fullest. There was nothing more I could have wished for. Every year at the Horatio Alger Dinner, a commemorative book is published honoring the past and present members of society. It is aptly titled Only in America. That is the story of your grandparents.
We hope you've enjoyed this video history and will keep it among your most treasured possessions. Show it to your children and your children's children so they may cherish the memory of bygone times.